Hey y'all, one of the big questions I had before I got my rats was, what do I even put in their cage? Now, there's a lot of answers to this. There's a lot of different things you need to have in your rat's cage to keep them healthy and happy. One of the big mistakes I've noticed with newer rat owners is that they simply don't fill their cage enough and it ends up looking kind of barren and empty, and your rats aren't going to be as happy that way. So I'm going to talk you through everything that I put in my rat cage today. I've just done a deep clean, so it's time for a restock. So come along, I'm going to show you everything that goes in here and why I put each individual item in their cage for them. First thing I'm going to put in their cage, because it's empty right now, and you see I have this tub here, that is going to hold all their bedding. Now, if you've just purchased a Critter Nation or some other kind of cage, it probably doesn't have a deep tub like this in it. This is actually a custom edition that I did. I purchased this tub at Lowe's, I think, maybe it was Home Depot, can't quite remember. I highly recommend doing something like this with your cage. I can do a whole other video about how to do that and why to do that exactly. But basically, it's going to allow you to get a lot more bedding in their cage, which is really good for them because, as you may know, rats are fossorial, which means they live on the ground and they do like to dig and burrow and hide their food in bedding and things like that. So having pretty deep bedding, 2 inches is a good marker to look for. I usually actually do a little bit more than that. And the other reason for this is if you have a flat surface and you do put a bedding like hemp or aspen shavings, they're just going to kick it out all over the floor. And that's what I was dealing with right when I got my rats, and I was just racking my brain. Why are they doing this? And it's because they're trying to burrow down into the bedding, and what ends up happening is they just kick it out of the cage and you end up having to vacuum a bunch every day. Now that I have a deeper tub for the bedding, I still end up with a little bit of bedding on the floor every now and then, but the problem has mostly gone away, and it actually just allows them to burrow without kicking all their bedding straight out onto the floor. I'm using aspen shavings right now, so whenever I replace the bedding, this involves about 30 minutes of de-dusting. Small Pet Select, your days are numbered. Oh my goodness, so much dust. Yeah, you see all that dust flying out of there? You definitely want to get as much dust out as possible. I feel like a chef tossing my dough. I've perfected this method. It's a bit like washing rice before you cook it. Once you start to see very little dust coming out, you're probably okay, but I do like to go a little bit overboard and sift through with my hands, double check it, make sure I'm getting as much to the top. Yeah, see there's still a little bit more. Oh, I made a mess. Now the de-dusted bedding is going in. You might actually see a little bit of dust rising up out of it. That's fine, it's normal, it's completely unavoidable if you're using a natural bedding like this. And the reason I use a natural bedding is because it does a lot better job than paper or fleece at absorbing the ammonia from their urine. Partly that's to deal with the smell for me. It's a lot more comfortable to be in the same room with it if it doesn't smell so bad. But the other reason is absorbing the ammonia actually protects your rat's respiratory systems. The trade-off though is that natural beddings tend to be a little bit dustier than your paper or your fleece, obviously, because fleece is not going to be dusty. And so you really have to balance dust versus ammonia buildup. Now that we've got the bedding in there, I usually like to move on to food and water since those are the most important things, so I'll just go ahead and put those in first. Now, I always do 2 water bottles like this. The reason I use bottles over bowls is that my rats tend to immediately dump out any water bowl that I give them, or they throw all their bedding into it and just soil it immediately. So that just hasn't worked for me in the past, though a lot of people will say that a water bowl is a more natural drinking position for a rat, which is probably true, but I've never noticed any problem with my rats drinking out of water bottles. They instinctively understand how to do it. It doesn't hurt their teeth, and if you put it in an okay position where they're not having to like turn upside down or craning their necks around, it's not going to cause any problems. I've also noticed that my rats really only like drinking out of water bottles if I put them in one spot in their cage. Don't know why, rats are just weird, so I always put them on this door right here, so that's what I'm gonna do. Now for food, most of the time I actually just scatter feed them by throwing their kibble all across the bedding, but I also always keep a puzzle feeder or two in their cage. This is my favorite kind of puzzle feeder. You fill it with a little bit of food and they have to spin it to get the food out. It keeps them stimulated. They really seem to enjoy doing it. It's kind of a game for them, so I like to use one of those. This is the other puzzle feeder I usually use, but I'm actually gonna wait to put this in until I get the second floor installed because I usually like to hang it underneath. Now that I've said that, I'm gonna go ahead and put in the second floor just so I can get a bit of a lay of the land. You definitely don't have to use a second level like this. Rats don't really need it. But I've noticed that mine like to always sleep in the hide that I put up here, and they just come down and they hang out right here. I always have a litter box up top for them as well, which I'll install in a minute. So now that I have that in there, I'm actually gonna lower this feeder down a little bit. And this one's gonna go right underneath. Like so. Since it takes up a lot of space and it's kind of a pill to install, I'm gonna go ahead and put in their wheel, which again, I don't always recommend using a wheel for rats. They don't really need it. I just noticed that when I put one in their cage, my rats immediately started using it and they seem to love it. I hear them all hours of the night running on their wheel. Just make sure it's the right size. Wheels need to be at least 14 inches for female rats or 16 inches for boys. I recommend just going all the way up to the 16 inch and make sure it's not a wire wheel. Now that we've got our wheel installed, I'm gonna go ahead and put back in all of their hides. Now I have 3 rats, so I always recommend 3 hides on the bottom of their cage, and then I happen to know that my rats like to sleep typically in crammed into one hide up top, so I always have 1 hide up top and then 3 down at the bottom. I actually use a half of a Sputnik as a set like this. I've actually removed this and I use it as a hide on the bottom, like so, and then this one goes up top. There we go. Perfect. I've also got this fake wood log that I really like to put in their cage as a hide on the bottom. I've noticed they really like storing food in there for some reason, and it gets nice and dark and cool inside that during the day. I'm gonna use this solid plastic tube right here in the corner, and then this soft one, this soft little pineapple, I'm going to clip into the corner over here. There we go. Now that I've got a good selection of hides in there, we're gonna go ahead and do our litter boxes. You probably already know this, but rats can actually be litter trained similarly to cats. However, I will say that my rats are far from perfect about this, and I've noticed also that they like to go poo in the litter box, and then sometimes they'll kick their old poo out and it ends up in the litter, so I will typically spot clean for that a few times a week. And this one down on the bottom that's in the bedding, I'm not worried about them moving that one around, but this one up top, because it's gonna go on a plastic surface, it can actually slide around, and I've noticed my rats will push it around, they'll hide behind it. So in order to keep it in one spot, I will actually clip it to the wall of the cage. There we go. To protect this top platform from getting completely pee soaked, I always put a nice little fleece blanket up there, like this. This is really to help give their paws something soft to land on when they jump out of their hide, but also it helps absorb a lot of the pee, because when they come out of their hide in the morning, they immediately want to go to the bathroom and they don't always make it to the litter box because they're lazy or stupid. Now that we've got all these basic essentials in there, you might be thinking, that looks pretty good. However, we have a lot of open space in here, and one of the problems we have is that there's not a lot to climb on. So next, I always want to put all my climbables in. I've actually removed mine, and I typically use it just as a ramp for them to get down from the cage during free roam, so I don't put that in the cage. However, I always put a bunch of climbables in there so they can get from the bottom to the top pretty easily. When I say climbable, that means a ton of different things. The first and most important kind is actually what I call a fall breaker. You might notice that rats will climb on top of the cage like this, and it's actually a little bit dangerous because they can fall from here all the way to the bottom. That's something we really want to avoid. Of course, rats are relatively durable and they're pretty decent climbers, but mistakes do happen. So it's important to keep something in here to break their fall. I'm also going to put this big wooden ladder in here. So now we've got plenty of climbing space here for them. I'm also going to attach a few climbables to the walls of the cage. The most important type of these are lava ledges. These are little installable ledges made of a porous stone. Now that I've got my lava ledges installed, I'm going to go ahead and install a couple more natural climbing items around the cage, like this wooden perch, a little rope perch for them. There we go. See, like that. Now they've got a lava ledge for water and then a rope perch for water. Now, as I dipped my head in here to install the wooden perch, I noticed that I've got a bit of a gap back here in the corner, so I'm going to make sure I fill that with something for them. And today, I think I'm going to do some hanging ropes. These are really good for just climbing, chewing, playing with, etc. So these are going to go hang all the way in the back here underneath the shelf. You might also be thinking, where are all the hammocks? Where are the soft hides? Now, I am going to put one in their cage, but I will note that my rats typically don't use them as much as they use their solid hides like this, or their hides down on the bottom, but I am going to put in a hammock because I know that in the past they have liked this one. Now that I've got that in, I'm actually going to slide this one forward just a bit to give it some extra space. There is some open space right here, but I actually typically will keep this spot open because this is where I tend to interact with them the most. Every time I come to greet them in the morning, they will be up here in their hide and they will hop down. I'll usually give them treats right here, give them a little food, and sometimes I will actually put in this little pink hide that they like to sleep on because it gives nice airflow underneath, so if it gets warm, they like to lay out on top of this. But I don't always keep that in there. This is something I put in, I take out, and I put in and take out. So right now, I'm gonna keep it out. At this point, we're looking really good, but I will say there's just a little bit of space down below that I think I could clutter up a little more. And then I wanna put something climbable up here to fill this space. So I'm gonna add a rope up top and this little white holy hide on the bottom. So that is gonna go in right down here in the back corner. I have a big rope that I'm going to put up top right here. At this point, you might be thinking, wow, there's too much stuff in there. It's really cluttered. That's actually a really good thing. Rats, like all rodents, love clutter. They need a lot of places to hide. They need lots of stuff to climb on, lots of things to chew on. And remember, they're really small. So what us looks like a bunch of cramped spaces, that feels very normal and very cozy to them. So if your rat cage looks very spacious, very open, and very breathable, that probably isn't the best for them. It might look aesthetically appealing to you, but I recommend filling it with as much clutter as possible. And if you're thinking, I don't have enough money to buy all of these rope ladders and wooden ladders and plastic hides and soft hides and things, don't worry. I always recommend just, when in doubt, throw in some cardboard boxes. They love cardboard boxes. They can hide in them, they can chew on them, they can rip them up and use them as bedding in their other hides. Cardboard boxes you can get for free, or if you get something shipped to you, use that. And whenever I get something shipped to me, I always take the brown paper stuffing, and I like to give that to them because they love to nest in that and rip it up. In fact, the other night I was woken in the middle of the night by a ripping sound, and it was just my rats tearing up a little bit of paper. Time to let the girls explore the new space. Here we go. Come on. There you go. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Sam from Rat Pod. If you have any questions, just drop them in the comments below. And if you're new to owning rats or you're considering adopting them for the first time, I actually have a free pet rat starter guide that you can download in the description of this video. And for rat owners out there, drop something in the comments that your rats love having in their cage. And I'll see you next time.